Hello, and welcome back to the UAS Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Piekarski, and today I am joined by Grant Jordan, CEO at SkySafe. Welcome to the podcast, Grant.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, we're happy to have you here, and let's start this off by having you share a bit about yourself and SkySafe as a company.
Yeah, so the background of both myself and my co-founders, we came from kind of a defense and security area, working in cybersecurity. Myself and three of the four of our co-founders, we were classmates at MIT together. After that, I was an Air Force officer for 4 years, working in the Air Force Research Lab. So I saw a lot of the DoD's early struggles with the risks of small UAVs and kind of the increased availability of them out there, and the fact that it was actually a hard problem to deal with. So that's kind of the direction that we came from. We started out primarily building systems for the DoD and for allied militaries, in kind of thinking about this as a tactical problem, as trying to understand how do you know what drones are in the area and how do you take action if needed. But I think in the last 2 years, especially, we've seen a big rise in the need for these types of systems and awareness and data in the commercial space across all sorts of areas like critical infrastructure, oil and gas, prisons, stadiums, airports, border protection. So the need is really out there. And beyond that, there's a lot of needs in the long term to be actually managing the airspace and integrating drones into the airspace. So I think that's where we as SkySafe have kind of a broader mission in figuring out how to safely enable drone use across the US and the world.
Great. Well, thank you for that. We'll get into the questions. So for any of our listeners that aren't familiar, could you go over what the current regulations are for the airspace surrounding chemical facilities?
Sure. And really, this applies broadly to all sorts of critical infrastructure, whether we're talking about chemical plants, oil and gas, prisons, airports. There's a lot of current regulations around where drones can fly and what the requirements are for pilots to be flying there. But I think one of the biggest things is trying to figure out for critical infrastructure in the long term, how those facilities can actually interact with law enforcement, figure out how to protect themselves from potential threats, whether they're kind of inadvertent or malicious, directly, purposefully malicious. There have been a few things passed, on the legislative side over the last few years. The Preventing Emerging Threats Act of 2018 outlined a whole lot of different possibilities in that and kind of the directions where things are going. There's a part called 2209 about having critical infrastructure defined to be able to protect their facilities. And a lot of that is still in progress as far as how exactly a facility can qualify for that, what the sort of coordination needs to be with law enforcement or with federal authorities. And I think right now, one of the biggest points of confusion to some extent is that most types of facilities out there don't have legal authority to take direct action against a drone that's in the airspace. It's illegal to interfere in general with an aircraft that's in the air, whether that's a drone or a traditional commercial aircraft. And so the only authorities that have the ability legally to take down a drone are essentially federal law enforcement and DoD. It's literally four agencies. It's Department of Energy with nuclear plants, DoD, DOJ, and DHS. They have relief from those regulations, but from those laws, but other organizations don't. So state and local authorities can't be knocking down drones, can't be jamming things. But I think that's part of why we focused a lot on thinking about notification and awareness of what drones are in the area, because I think the really important thing in most actual incidents, whether you're talking about critical infrastructure or even prisons that we see a lot currently, is the awareness piece of knowing that there's a drone in the area, understanding what it's doing, where it's going, and being able to locate the operator of the drone, because that's really where the risk is a directly malicious operator who's trying to do something in there. So being able to coordinate with local law enforcement and let them know what's going on and where they can respond to, that's kind of the critical piece.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue into our next question. What are some of the potential dangers that could occur in cases where drones are disturbing the airspace of these facilities?
Yeah, well, there's a wide range of threats, and it's everything from minor disturbances of drones where the operator isn't really trying to do anything malicious. It may just be, something slightly careless, like an operator flying into the approach path of an airport and not realizing that they're in there. And because of that, disrupting flights, causing grounding of flight operations, potentially putting people's lives in danger. In other areas like prisons, we see drones being used to smuggle contraband into prisons constantly. I mean, it's been a massively rising threat. We see all kinds of things being smuggled into prisons, whether it's, literally pounds of narcotics, opioids, et cetera, or weapons or cell phones. Criminal gangs are using them to bring in contraband on a, nearly daily basis. It's pretty wild at the moment. So that's, that's just a small sampling. So it can be everything from directly malicious, direct, threats where someone's trying to do harm to just unintentional consequences of disrupting operations. Most of the disruptions we've seen at stadiums, when we're talking, NFL or MLB games, most of those disruptions so far have been relatively benign. It'll be a game stoppage. It'll be somebody flying in, trying to get a cool video of a game, and they'll pause the game for a while the person hopefully flies away. Then overseas in military environments, currently in Ukraine, but in Iraq and Afghanistan before that, we're seeing directly weaponized drones. And I think for a lot of us in the space, it's only a matter of time before we see some of these more directly in the US.
Yeah, for sure. So what infrastructure or technology would you suggest be implemented to help mitigate these risks around facilities?
Yeah, so that's really what we focus on now, is in trying to build out the larger scale infrastructure to be tracking and monitoring and coordinating the airspace as a whole. For us, it's about, I think when we first started, we were focusing a lot more on the tactical side, on thinking about, building systems for military environments where you might be mounting them on a vehicle, having forces on the ground, seeing where the drones are, maybe jamming them. But I think as we've kind of zoomed out a bit, we've seen that the longer term problems are more about larger scale airspace coordination, larger scale awareness, and the same way we think about it in traditional airspace, where in traditional aviation, we're tracking the locations of all these flights so that we can coordinate and deconflict and see if there's something being done that's unsafe. What we need is the same sort of infrastructure for the drone world. And that's exactly what SkySafe is building. So we're essentially building large-scale drone tracking networks across cities, both here in the US and in other countries, where we can monitor the airspace, see what's going on with the drones, and hopefully in the long term also be doing the coordination and deconfliction with other organizations kind of as a whole.
That's very interesting. Thank you, Grant. So I'm going to make this next question a two-parter. If a facility sees a drone in their airspace, what are they allowed to do about it? And if they recover a drone that has crash landed, what should they do with the drone in that case?
Yeah, so the first piece of, seeing a drone in a particular airspace, if that's, a critical facility, a prison, an airport, a thing, the first answer, as I kind of hinted at earlier, is what they can't do is go off and knock down the drone. That's not okay. You can't do that. But in a real-time incident, when we're talking about incident response, I really think about two halves of the problem. One is, where is the drone right now? What is it doing? Where is it going? And, what steps can you take to mitigate any potential effects of that drone? So, if it's a prison and we know there's a drone flying into that prison and it potentially has a package with contraband that they're trying to smuggle into it, then we can dispatch corrections officers, law enforcement, what have you, to the location of where that drone is going so that they can intercept the package. And I think in a lot of these discussions that I'm in, a lot of people put a lot of focus on what do I do about the drone itself, right? But in pretty much every case, it's not the drone itself that's the problem. It's whatever the drone is doing, whatever the drone is, whether it's trying to smuggle something in or take photos or, endanger someone, whatever. It's about mitigating the effects of that event. So if there's people using drones to bring contraband into prisons, and every single time I'm able to track the location of that drone and see where the drop is and intercept that package every single time over and over again, then I've completely defanged that threat. I've gone and made it so that that is not an effective means to smuggle things into that prison. So that's an effective mitigation capability in that case. It's not about knocking a drone out of the air. It's about actually thinking about what is the problem we're trying to solve. And in the correction space, the problem we're generally trying to solve is smuggling of contraband. The second half of that problem, the first half is what is the drone doing? Where is it going? The second half is the human operator behind the drone. And I often think a lot about this. I was in an Interpol discussion a little while ago, and one of the federal partners there made a really great observation. And they said that, I think this is the best phrase I've heard so far. He said, we don't arrest the drone. When it comes down to it, when we're talking about, dangerous or criminal acts, it's not the drone. The drone is just a tool. What we're really worried about is the person behind that drone and their intent, what they're trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish. So for us, the other piece of incident response is trying to figure out where the operator of that drone is in real time so that we can actually have those authorities respond and, hopefully apprehend that person while the incident is still happening so they can actually, take care of that. So I think that's my big kind of message about that. It's not just about the drone. It's about what's actually happening, who is behind it, and what they're actually trying to accomplish. And I think taking that holistic approach is huge. To your second question, you've had a drone incident, maybe a drone has crashed or been recovered in some way. And, what do you do with it then? It obviously depends on the kind of exact, details of who's recovering that. But one of the areas that we focus pretty heavily on is in the forensics space, which is essentially analyzing and extracting data from drones after an incident once they've been recovered. So we provide tools and training and services to go and take those drones after an incident, connect to the drone, pull all the data off of it, decode that, analyze that digital forensics data to be able to look at, okay, where does this drone come from? What do its flight logs say in the past? Any imagery that may be on it? And we've had tremendous results working with law enforcement partners to be able to follow up on drone incidents, to be able to find the people responsible. Both law enforcement and DoD have tons of incidents where there are drones, flying into facilities, flying onto bases, crashing into stuff. And we've had a lot of success extracting data for those investigators to be able to actually follow up and really do something about it on the prosecution side.
That's great. So to circle back on your comment about the network earlier, can you elaborate further on the range of the sensors and how they work together to build a city scale network?
Yeah, so I think that's really the big difference in how we think about this problem now versus in the past, kind of when this industry was early. Number one, we think about it as building out a kind of coverage over entire areas. And that means different technologies for different use cases. So SkySafe, our whole background and focus is in the RF sensing space. So we're looking at the radio signals that are coming from these different targets, and we're tracking them that way. But we also look to integrate other sensor types over time to build out different capabilities in different places on that network. So you can think about it as we're building out RF everywhere, tracking drone activity all over the place. And then for specific critical sites, whether you're talking about a specific oil and gas site or maybe a prison, we may supplement that network with other sensor types beyond just RF, potentially adding radar or cameras or things like that to be able to give essentially additional data and additional kind of, I would think about it as kind of a small high definition view of that area to be able to add additional information for those particular facilities, for those particular customer types. So it ends up being about combining different types of sensor stuff, because really, again, going back to like, what are we trying to solve? It's really about being able to give the insights at the end, of what is drone activity in that area, where do these drones come from? And that's really kind of our mission at SkySafe, is being the real source of truth of drone activity across a region, across the world.
So what is the importance and the significance of being able to view that historical flight data from drones that you detect around these facilities?
Yeah, so I think once you get beyond just this kind of individual facility view, beyond that tactical view, what you really start looking at is larger pattern of life kind of questions. So if you're trying to understand, not just what's happening right now in an incident, but where did this drone come from? Where have we seen it before? Is this a repeat offender? And is this part of a larger pattern of what we're seeing? For instance, if I'm running a series of oil and gas or power generation facilities, and I see the same drone scoping out multiple of those sites, that in and of itself may be an indication of something. So really kind of zooming out and looking at this as a larger scale airspace activity sort of question, and really kind of focusing in on the data analytics around historical flight data, what are drones doing, and kind of the patterns around that. And in the future, when we're thinking about larger scale questions of integrating drones into the national airspace safely and building out, what might be like drone corridors, part of that is understanding drone activity and where drones need to fly to be able to do these different commercial things, whether it's, package delivery or inspection or other types of applications. Really understanding the broader picture of the airspace is what's most important there.
That makes perfect sense. So what is the level of difficulty when using this system? And is there any sort of training provided for users?
Yeah, I think our real big focus, especially in the last year, has been making everything as easy and as transparent as possible from a system perspective, because I think that was one real big lesson learned for us early in the industry when thinking about, drone tracking and counter drone, is that, when you're providing systems to the military, these systems can be complex, they can be difficult to use, they can require a lot of training. But when you're providing systems to the airport, the prison, the stadium, things domestically, you really have to make it easy to use, easy to implement, easy to maintain, because the primary mission, the primary goal of our customers in those areas is not drone stuff. They're not trying to be drone experts. They're not trying to be RF experts. They're not trying to be, in the military side, what we would call like electronic warfare or SIGINT experts. They're really just trying to solve the problem of drones, endangering their particular facility in the easiest way possible. So that's a lot of why we focused on building out the simplicity of this and really putting all of the onus on us at SkySafe of doing the heavy lifting of the hard part of deploying these sensors as networks, maintaining and updating that entire network over time around the world, all the time, and being able to provide just exactly what these customers need from a direct like cloud platform, rather than having them try to have to deploy things on their own and maintain stuff on their own. I think that's just become super, super clear to us and super important. And it's really analogous to how the direction a lot of industries have gone in technology. When you think about a cell phone network, if you've got, I go to get a cell phone from AT&T or Verizon, I don't worry about how do I deploy a cell tower and how do I maintain a cellular network. No, I buy the service. And so that's exactly how SkySafe operates at this point, is we build out all the infrastructure, we manage it, we manage all the data, and we're able to provide exactly what these customer groups need to actually solve their problem and not have to worry about the mechanics of how to maintain everything around it.
We are coming near the end of our time here. Again, we are joined today by Grant Jordan, CEO at SkySafe. Thank you again for joining us today, Grant. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, really. The only other thing I would add is that, if any of the listeners here are managers of facilities concerned about drone activity, looking to do something, or looking for just any advice in this realm, feel free to reach out to us. I think much of our work is really about educating the industry and, being able to provide that direct advice. So I'm happy to respond anytime.
Sounds good. And do you have a website they can find your information at?
Yeah, that's skysafe.io.
Perfect. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you or your company is interested in recording a podcast, please reach out to UAS Magazine. We hope that you enjoyed this episode and we look forward to next time. Until then.